Super Prime Time Max. Arnab will be live in just a few minutes from now. I'm Niranjan and I have Shawan with me in the studios at Asia's largest news center. We're filling in for Arnab, who will be live from 9 p.m. and we are joining you with three subjects. 8, 8:30 and 9 p.m. The next 2 hours are going to be packed a day before Maharashtra goes to poll. Shawan.
Well, in fact, it's a power-packed debate lined up, starting with that change in the doctrine. Is Russia going to carry on with the nuclear first doctrine? That's our debate starting at 8 p.m. And then 8:30, the big political face-off with the TTD now announcing that non-Hindus are going to be the staff members at Tirumala. AIMIM has now hit out. And at 9 o'clock tonight, ladies and gentlemen, just ahead of the polling, that's the big political face-off with senior BJP leader caught red-handed distributing cash. That's the allegation that's been leveled against Vinod Taude. Vinod Taude defends himself. That's the debate coming up at 9 p.m. Let's take a look at the headlines we're tracking at this hour.
Big move by Vladimir Putin as Russia revises its nuclear doctrine, declaring that a conventional attack on Russia by any nation that is supported by a nuclear power will be considered a joint attack on his country, which means it's game over for Russia, for America.
First, we will offer the VRS and we will send it to some other government department. We will take their opinion and we will go according to that.
The newly constituted Tirumala Tirupati Devasthanam Trust Board passes a new diktat which includes seeking the transfer of non-Hindu workers at the Tirupati temple.
Biggest controversy of the election season in Maharashtra, and that 2 hours before Maharashtra votes. Cash for votes charge hits the BJP. Allegations, counter allegations, flying thick and fast. Thank you for joining us on the debate, ladies and gentlemen. Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, has lost his patience, and America and Ukraine are having their missiles and their entire doctrine being tested. This is the Cuban crisis moment. Russia has been forced to revise its nuclear doctrine, and now the nuclear threshold of the world's second largest nuclear power is at its lowest since inception. But what led to this historic revision of Russia's nuclear policy? That's our focus this evening, Shawan.
Well, in fact, it all started with Joe Biden essentially lifting the restrictions, essentially allowing Ukraine to carry out an attack at the heart of Russia. Ladies and gentlemen, this war essentially began with Russia essentially indicating that they need to protect their borders. But the outgoing president, has he gone a step further? Are we really at the brink of a third world war? And if at all, Russia changes its doctrine, what does it mean for the entire region? That's the focus.
As the war in Ukraine reached its 1000th day of combat, Russia has finally unveiled its long-teased nuclear doctrine. As per Putin's new nuclear doctrine, any non-nuclear power that launches an attack on Russia backed by a nuclear power will be considered as joint assault. This means Ukraine, a non-nuclear power, if it launches an attack on Russia with US backing, it will be considered a joint attack. Russia also amended its doctrine to include any conventional missile, drone or aircraft attack worthy of nuclear retaliation. Not just that, The doctrine also says that any attack by a coalition member on Russia will be treated as joint aggression by the whole coalition, clearly taking a firm stance against NATO.
Почему это потребовалось? Нужно было привести в соответствие наши основы с нынешней обстановкой. Это первое. Второе, Россия всегда рассматривала ядерное оружие как средство сдерживания, применение которого является крайней и вынужденной мерой. И Россия всегда занимала ответственную позицию и принимала необходимые усилия.
The announcement comes just days after US finally gave in to Ukrainian demand to allow American-made long-range missiles to be used in the war against Russia. Addressing the EU Parliament today, this is what Ukrainian President Zelensky had to say on the war with Russia as it enters a new phase.
Together we have accomplished much, but we must not fear doing even more. Now, Putin has brought 11,000 North Korean troops to Ukraine's borders. This contingent may grow to 100,000. While some European leaders think about, some elections or something like this at Ukraine's expense, Putin is focused on winning this war. He will not stop on his own.
With US President-elect Trump talking tough on brokering a peace deal in Eastern Europe, Putin taking an unprecedented aggressive nuclear stance, are we one step closer to a nuclear flashpoint in the 21st century?
It's a dangerous situation that we are facing right now. Tara Kartha, Peter Kuznick and Fred joining us on the debate tonight. Opening up with the comments coming in from Moscow first. Fred, it's a clear position that Kremlin has taken. The first nuclear use policy that is going to be taken into consideration. Do you believe that Russia was waiting for this to happen? Because at the end of the day, what many do not know is the fact that Russia too would be in a situation where they would like to at least consolidate their position before President Trump takes power.
Well, it's a very dangerous situation, that's for sure. It's been building for some time, these red lines, one after another. And back in September, Putin made it very, very clear that the use of weapons of this sort, sophisticated missiles, would have to, in his view, entail direct hands-on participation by NATO officers, which means they would be directly at war with Russia.
But was this some sort of an excuse? Fred, was this some sort of an excuse? Because Russia was waiting for this position to be taken, and they perhaps need something to justify their current position or changing the nuclear doctrine. Was this an excuse that they were waiting for?
I think that the history of the past couple of years led to this. The Russians knew something like this was coming, and they have been struggling to assert their deterrence, invoking rather freely their nuclear arsenal. This is true. And the new doctrine does say very clearly that if a conventional power attacks Russia in coalition with a nuclear power, that would cross the threshold for use of nuclear weapons. That doesn't mean they will, because that's exactly the situation we're in right now. Russia says that Ukraine has fired at least one of these missiles into Russian territory, so we're in that place right now.
Peter, it brings to the same question that an outgoing president lifting restrictions that were imposed right from the start of the war is an indication of the fact that perhaps, as Kremlin has been pointing out, that President Biden is trying to only destabilize the situation.
Well, it's pretty transparent that,
Biden Fred, the question was for Peter Kuznick, because I want to also understand, if at all we are reaching this position, it's because of the miscalculations of this outgoing administration. Peter Kuznick.
I think it's worse than a miscalculation. It's a very, very reckless move. All the experts are saying it's too little, too late. It's not going to affect the outcome of the war. Knowing that, Biden has still given this permission in a way that's possibly going to provoke Russia into a much more aggressive response. We've seen that capability even without use of nuclear weapons. You look at what Israel has done in Gaza, the way it's leveled Gaza. Putin has not done that inside of Ukraine. We see what happened in World War II, in Korea, in other wars that have taken place. They have that capability, and they have not exercised it. But every time you cross one of Putin's red lines, it puts him in a position of either delivering or backing down. And we've seen throughout history that people can back down once, maybe even twice, but then they're in a position where they either entirely lose credibility or they act on it. I think this is so reckless to endanger, to even risk that for a policy that is going to have no demonstrable effect on the outcome of this war. Russia is in the driver's seat. They are moving aggressively and rapidly in eastern Ukraine, and now they're going to try to claw back those 650 square kilometers that Ukraine holds in Kursk, and they'll be able to do that. So this is just an insanely dangerous risk that could provoke a nuclear war.
Peter, from an outside view, and I want to bring in Tara Karta here. Tara Karta is a former National Security Council Secretary. She's left in Delhi. From India, as we view it, right? You've had an election in America. Trump has come in promising an end to the wars, right? It's looking so bad for America. America is looking like a confused country. We're all wondering here, sitting in India, what is going on? I mean, you have one incoming president who's saying that he's going to end all wars. And you have an old Joe Biden, right? And people know that he's not in his not in his best capacity to serve as the president, and he's nowhere to be seen, even in that G20 picture. But that's not the point. Point is, it's looking very bad on America. I don't know what the American people think about this. Tara Karta, from an outsider's view, how is this looking to you?
I think it's political spite. He wants to make sure. Trump said the day he comes, he says, I'll end this in one day. He'll end the war in one day. Joe Biden, by giving this supply of missiles, is trying to make sure that doesn't happen, because this is a clear escalation. As we said, the first couple of missiles have already been fired. It's extremely dangerous, and I can't believe that a politician would resort to such a tactic. There are people's lives at stake.
Yes.
The nuclear war which is at stake. How can you do this? It's unbelievable. And it's still Russia's doctrine. If you remember, when the war started, he was kind of talking of nuclear strikes. Then they went back on it. They kind of reversed that. They didn't say, they said, we will not go into that kind of escalation. But now I don't think Putin really has a choice. And as I said, he's been talking about this in September. So it's not even as if you didn't know.
Yeah. Fred, the fact here is this. While on the one hand, this is also about petty politics playing out in the United States of America, but many would say that as far as Kremlin is concerned, Kremlin essentially wants to change this given the fact that time is running out. Under President Trump, perhaps President Putin may not have that kind of maneuvering that you would expect, and that would essentially mean consolidate the area as soon as you can. Particularly what we are witnessing in Donetsk right now, where he's trying to consolidate their position, and the fact that he's brought in the North Koreans. How exactly do you think this is going to really pan out even for Russia right now?
I don't think that the Russian war agenda is pegged in any way to Trump's coming in. I think that the Russians have very, very few hopes that Trump will change much, if anything. It's been my impression for at least the last year that they are just grimly determined to win the war on the battlefield. And they are, in the process of apparently doing that. Now, it would be helpful if big countries were to step in and try to mediate a peace, but it would have to be realistic, And if they're going to twist Moscow's arm, they probably got to be prepared to twist Kiev's arm too. But I don't see any moves like that, certainly no signals of that sort coming from the West, other than Trump's rhetoric. Neither are big countries like India or China or Brazil apparently stepping up. There might be things happening under the radar that I don't know about, but basically we've got a war that's going on, and January 20th will come and go, and it will still be going on in much the same way.
Okay, I want to get in Peter right now. Peter, you see, I mean, allies and partners have made significant contributions to Ukraine, right? Including delivery of 10 long-range multiple launch rocket systems, which are MLRS systems, 178 long-range artillery pieces, nearly 100,000 rounds of artillery ammunition, 250,000 anti-tank munitions, 359 tanks, 629 armored personnel carriers, and America still wants to go all out, right? It appears like Biden and the Democrats want to somehow, before they go, just oil the war machinery one last time. It's appearing increasingly like that.
This war has gone on now for 1,000 days. It is this 1,000th day anniversary. And the losses have been horrific on both sides. The human destruction, the economic destruction. It's been a horrific war in so many ways. And clearly, Biden sees this as part of his legacy. And he is trying to do whatever he can to put Trump in a position where Trump can't follow through on his promises. But Trump has made such an issue of this that I think he's going to be forced to deliver. And if we look at the people he's announced, many of them are Iran hawks, many of them are China hawks. They want to see the U.S. out of Ukraine so the U.S. can focus on the issues that they consider to be higher priorities. So they're not really anti-war or pro-peace, but they have different priorities. So I'm a little more optimistic than Fred is that Trump will make a difference. But he's correct to say that Putin is going to win this on the battlefield, which he's already doing right now. And so my hope is that Putin is going to say, well, Trump's coming in 2 months, and he's going to be much more amenable to solving this diplomatically in ways that will benefit Russia. And so he's not going to take Biden's bait and do something much more aggressive.
Yeah, very interesting, Peter.
These missiles.
Peter, I have a very interesting data that's come in. You know, most people want an end to the war. I mean, it's the 1,000th day, right? I remember the day it happened. We were in bed here in India. It was a little after 2 a.m., 3 a.m. when the story broke, when we saw the first missiles being launched. It's been 1,000 days, right? How many lives have been lost? And to think that the so-called the world's most powerful nation, right? Now, they don't want an end to wars. They don't want an end to this madness that's going on, right? Let me give you a poll data that I have, and my question is to Tara. I have a poll data that's just come in, been reported. It's a Gallup poll. It's a survey conducted between August and October. And for the first time since the war, since 1,000 days, you have most Ukrainians wanting the war to end as soon as possible. Ukrainians are saying enough is enough. Ukrainians are saying we don't want a war, right? Trump is saying we don't want a war. Most people around the world are saying we don't want a war. The Indian Prime Minister wants an end to the war. Indians want an end to the war. It's crazy that there is a man called Joe Biden and there is a Ukrainian president called Zelensky. These two men want the war to go on, maybe at the risk of having a nuclear war. I just got this poll come in, and let me also tell you, only 38%, Tara, I want you to take this forward, only 38% believe that their country should continue fighting for victory, almost half compared to the 73% who expressed their opinion in 2022. So today, most Ukrainians saying they want a negotiated end to this war.
Well, that's hardly surprising given the kind of, as you said, the tragedy that has gone through for what was once a prosperous state. I mean, this was a country which was living peacefully and well. And look what's happened to them. It's somewhere there has to be accountability as to how did this happen. And the point I want to make is, I think Zelensky can be sort of, his position is that as long as the war goes on, he goes on. I think if the war stops, I'm not sure how long Zelensky will last. And that poll is probably providing that answer. Having said that, it's not as if Russia is has a halo on its head or anything of the kind. Russia has done its own share of absolute, how can you bring in North Korean troops? That is ridiculous. But it is at least reined in, as it said. It's not gone all out in terms of attacking civilians and all the rest of it. That apart, I think there is an Indian role here to get this war to stop. It's hurting us. There is a moral aspect to it in terms of these people dying, and it's hurting us. So I think Prime Minister Modi should use his influence to try and, break this thing, stop it before it gets out of hand.
Peter, the question here is also about the role of NATO. When the war began, it was largely about whether at all Ukraine is going to be part of NATO. That was well settled. Russia said that they needed to defend their border, particularly with the threat coming in from NATO. Where do they stand at this point in time? Because it seems they're completely redundant given their position. What we are witnessing today, that US lifts the kind of restriction which they were putting all this through. And today it's very clear that this is not Ukraine's war. It is now turning out to be West's war against Russia.
Well, you have to remember that back in March and April of 2022, shortly after the war started, Zelensky was willing to accept a negotiated settlement, what we call the Turkish Accords. And then Boris Johnson flies in there and says, don't accept that. We're going to arm you and support you unlimitedly. And then the United States doubles down on that. So there have been people inside Ukraine who have wanted a negotiated settlement from the very beginning. But as Sarah says, Zelensky's in a very tenuous position now, where when there are right-wing forces who have threatened his life if he negotiates, and then there's also the popular effort to remove him. He's no longer officially the president because his term has expired already. And so, but when you talk about NATO, that is an absolute red line for Russia. Ukraine is going to have to accept neutrality, and as well as other changes that Russia's demanding. Russia is not going to give up what it controls on the battlefield, which it's claimed 4 provinces as part of Russia. It doesn't control all of those yet, but that's where the negotiations are going to take place. The area that Russia militarily controls will become part of Russia, as well as Crimea. And Ukraine is going to suffer a loss of approximately 20% of its territory. But the Ukrainian people are fed up. I mean, they've lost, the morale is terrible. The casualties and the deaths are astronomical. And the suffering of the economy has been really, very, very extensive.
Fred, there's a role that perhaps Russia also plays here. The fact that today you're looking at this change in the doctrine itself is an indication of where it is headed. Someone will have to rein in Russia too, because if this continues, today we've seen the position that they've taken vis-a-vis Belarus too. So it's a clear indication that somewhere down the line, their entire expansionist policy will also have to be reined in.
I think that what will be necessary, and I'm afraid it probably won't happen, but it would be good to get a legal end to this war when it's winding down, and it's clearly coming to an end. If international commission or bodies sits down and with the Russians and Ukrainians hammer out a treaty that legally ends the war, puts a stop to it, sets borders, as unpalatable as that may be, it's the best possible outcome. Because if we get ceasefires and messy, unfinished business, this is going to go on down there in the region for a long time. It's going to be almost as bad as it is now. And the international climate, that is, relations between Russia and the West, will become absolutely irreparable, and we'll be facing another long, brutal Cold War.
Yeah, looking at the live pictures coming from the G20 in Brazil, in Rio. I don't see Joe Biden there. Joe Biden hasn't been seen in most of the photo opportunities there, Shravan.
So does Justin Trudeau.
Yes, Justin Trudeau, of course. I mean, nobody wants to be seen with him. That's a different thing altogether. But these are live pictures coming in of Prime Minister Modi seen there with Giorgia Meloni of Italy and heads of state. And one of the key statements that came in from the Russian the foreign minister, if I can go back to those pictures, I just want to read over those pictures because it's connected to the G20. Let's go back to the pictures, if I can request our producers, because something else has happened there. The West has also tried to sort of Ukrainize the G20 agenda. They've tried to do that at every summit for the last 1,000 days, right? But there are many members who insisted that other conflicts also be included in the final declaration because even they've had enough. Even the G20 countries have had enough, Tara. They've had enough saying that enough of this trying to Ukrainize every global summit that happens. And many countries have reportedly reluctantly agreed to discuss the points of the G20 final declaration, and they also try to bung in the Middle East. They also try to insert a point on Gaza after the point on Ukraine. And it's become, I think even the world is split now. I mean, China doesn't want the war. Russia is willing to end the war. And the world is split on this issue.
Yeah, I think it's hurting us, like I said. And it's hurting the global south. These are very high, costs which we are paying for wars for which we have no stakes in any of these. And what surprises me most is the fact that nobody is even trying to mediate. And what kind of wars are these when nobody is even trying to put a stop to them? That is what surprises me the most. And, I hope they won't mind me saying, but Europeans have been at war like forever.
Yeah.
And getting tired of being dragged into these wars. Middle East, well, more or less likewise. So I think the global south, India, we need a break here. We need to get on with our economy, with things that affect our peoples, and that's the job of the Prime Minister, right?
We continue to pay for the wars that Americans start in the Middle East. You just mentioned the Middle East. I mean, very interestingly, what has happened today, and while Russia escalates this, right, because of American needling, what has also happened is that for the first time since what happened in Israel, Lebanon and Hezbollah have agreed to a US proposal for a ceasefire with Israel. That's also happening, right? It's for the first time that Lebanon and Hezbollah have agreed to a US proposal for a ceasefire with Israel. And the Assistant Speaker of the Lebanese Parliament has told the media, confirming that they are ready to even do a ceasefire with Israel. Everyone's had enough of the wars that Americans sort of play an active role in, right? The White House has confirmed that one of their envoys is in Beirut. They've already discussed the offer with the Lebanese Parliament Speaker. And these are some breaking news developments that I'm also getting, Shravan, on this issue.
Well, in fact, Fred, if I can just get that word from you too. The fact of the matter is this, that somewhere down the line, both sides will have to be on the negotiating table, starting from what we saw in Belarus to, of course, in Switzerland. And the fact here that even today, Russia says that we are not willing to sit on the negotiating table. So how does this really end? If you're saying a legal recourse to it, legal recourse can only be possible if Russia agrees to the fact that you will have to demarcate the areas, allow the Ukrainians the position that they have had in the past, and perhaps come to terms with the situation.
Oh, I don't think Russia is refusing to talk. They want conditions that will satisfy them. They don't.
But agreements have been flouted in the past too. The Minsk agreement was flouted.
Yes, but that's why we don't. But we never had down there any agreements that worked. The Minsk Accords were an abject failure, partly because Kiev absolutely refused to implement them. But the main sticking point is NATO expansion. I think that the Russians will not accept any outcome other than neutrality for Ukraine. Whatever Ukrainian state emerges from this, it has got to be like Finland during the Cold War or something like that. I don't think the Russians care if Ukraine is democratic or not. They never have really cared about that. They will be happy if it has its independence, but as long as it's under those geostrategic conditions and neutrality first and foremost. Secondly, there will have to be rights for Russian speakers and a few other things, demilitarization of some regions. I think the Russians will demand, but otherwise they're ready to make that deal. But it's so far even the West is not signaling any willingness to do that.
Fred, Peter and Taraji, thank you for joining us on the debate. We're moving on now. We're keeping a close track on the situation in Ukraine. To the other big story we're tracking